It's a pleasure for me, coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran, to address you here in the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Mr. Hanyu, Mr. Nazar Ahari, dear guests, I hope that we can spend some time together exchanging views on the recent developments in this part of the world, in Asia, in West Asia, and specifically in Iran. But before I specifically address the issue of moderation, since Sasakawa Peace Foundation has a long history of successful activities in the field of international exchange and promoting understanding among nations, which is very essential to the issue of peace, I'd like to touch on some points concerning peace, because peace is intrinsically related to moderation. And peace is so elusive these days. We talk about peace in every forum. It seems to be the lofty objective of practically every politician, and many human beings long for peace. They seek peace. But at the same time, in spite of all the advances, that humanity has made during all these decades, during all these centuries, in spite of the fact that we have achieved unbelievable progress in science, in technology, in advancing in the frontiers of knowledge, like stem cell technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, information technologies. Humans have advanced in all these areas, and it's truly a great asset for human civilization. There's no question to that. But at the same time, we haven't advanced so well in areas like peace building. In my part of the world, in the Middle East, or Western Asia as we like to call it, we had about 30 wars or conflicts just in the past 2 or 3 decades. Maybe 3 decades ago, we just had the issue of Palestine. Now we have Afghanistan, we have Iraq, we have Syria, we have in other parts of the world, in Africa, in this part of the world, now in Ukraine. Tensions seem to be an ongoing issue in today's world. We haven't been able to develop the necessary talent, the necessary capability to deal with the issue of peacemaking. And it seems still to be a very remote goal that we still have to work very much. We need to expend many efforts to achieve that goal. Well, if we want to deal with reasons why we have not been able to achieve peace, I believe that some of those reasons lie in the quality of leadership in today's world. Many believe that there's a serious mismanagement in today's world. Environmentalists believe that we're not managing our world properly because the resources are being depleted. Global warming is, according to the recent IPCC report that we had a few days ago, global warming is undermining life on Earth. And so environmentalists believe that we're facing a serious mismanagement in today's world. We're not managing our resources properly. Peace activists also believe that we have a mismanagement in terms of being able to deal with the diversity of cultures, of human beings, protecting their rights, nations being able to live with each other, live with differences. We haven't been able to manage that properly, although we have mechanisms like the United Nations, and we have successful NGOs like the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and many other groups and NGOs in the world, but it seems that their voice is not always properly heard, or they haven't been effective enough in dealing with many of these issues and challenges. And maybe if we take a look into the root causes and see why we are facing these issues, which are seriously threatening, because peace is the prerequisite for sustainable development, for security, for education, for health. If you visit one of these countries in Africa where war has devastated the country, or in my own country after 8 years of the aggression of the Saddam regime against our country, we witnessed war. You have witnessed the devastation, particularly after the nuclear attacks in Hiroshima and Kawasaki. You know very well what happened in Hiroshima and the aftermath. We know the devastation, not only for the human aspect, but also the natural aspect, the nature which is destroyed after war. So peace is the prerequisite for all aspects of human development. And when it's not there, it's very difficult to speak. We were in Iraq a few months ago to promote environmental cooperation with Iraq. And it was so difficult to speak about environmental cooperation because they're dealing with violence, extremism, terrorism. And they have a very difficult situation, security situation. So peace is the basic pillar of any human development. And it goes back to our mentality. It begins in our minds, it begins in our hearts. Human beings who lead today's world, if they don't begin with peace within themselves, they won't be able to bring about peace without in the external world. Peace within human beings is the initial step, particularly when it goes to leaders who intend to lead a political movement, a social movement, a country, or a global movement. That inner peace is the key to the capability to be able to deal with peace at the external level, to be able to deal with peace among nations, peace among different societies, peace among ethnic groups. Initially, that leader has to begin with peace within himself or herself, that internal peace. Because most of the wars, they go back to our selfishness. They go back to our excesses. We want more and more every day. Countries are looking for more resources. They're looking for more security for their own people. They don't have that holistic and collective view of all humanity, which is necessary for peace. And the same goes for peace with nature. Before you can achieve peace with nature and protect the global environment, you need to resolve that inner issue of selfishness and greed. Without resolving that issue, again, human beings tend to go after more income, more profit, more wealth, controlling more resources, and this is the outcome that we have today. So when we speak about peace, I think it is an inner issue. It's an issue of the individual, the heart and the soul and the mind, before it's a political issue. Ultimately, if we seek peace in today's world between societies and between human beings, if we seek peace with nature, being able to live on planet Earth in harmony with nature, in harmony with the flora and fauna that we have, the biodiversity that we have in today's world, we have to begin within ourselves. And much of that goes back to education, goes back to our perspectives, our worldview, how we see things, and how we can overlook our selfish needs to see that collective objective of humanity, to see the holistic approach of where humanity is heading and how sometimes we need to pass over and put aside our selfish viewpoints and see that larger perspective, that larger picture. So this, I think, this is an important theme that initially I wanted to touch upon the peace issue, because I thought that the Sasakawa Peace Foundation has an important mandate in dealing with these issues. As I mentioned, there's a very important relationship between peace and moderation. Because moderation, we use the theme moderation, the term moderation, as opposed to radicalism and extremism. And we think that moderation stems from that inner peace. President Rouhani was elected about a year ago in Iran after presidential elections where different contestants came to the scene. And some of those contestants indicated that they preferred to follow the line of the previous government. Some of them had similar political lines. Among them, there were two contestants. One, Dr. Mohammad Reza Aref, who was the vice president under President Khatami. He was a reformist. And the other, Dr. Rouhani, Dr. Hassan Rouhani, who was a moderate, we can say both in one aspect reformist and in another aspect principalist, but who had very clear views on a change of the political trends occurring at that time in the country. And once the election process advanced, the reformists decided to make an alliance with the moderate principalist forces, and therefore they agreed, and Dr. Aref stepped aside, and all the reformist forces in Iran went behind Dr. Rouhani. During his campaign, Dr. Rouhani promised new waves of change in not only political dimensions in Iran, but also economic changes, improvement of economic indicators. Dr. Rouhani also stressed upon improvement of relationships with the world, and as well as issues like health. He had very clear perspectives on the environment, and through this, the election process, Dr. Rouhani gained the majority of the votes, and in the first round, he was elected as the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So this process led to the establishment of a government based on moderation, the basic theme of Dr. Rouhani's campaign was moderation. He stressed, and he follows this policy today, to bring together different political viewpoints. In his cabinet, he has experienced politicians from practically all different political tendencies in Iran. He also has followed the policy of improving economic indicators. Inflation has been curbed during the past 8 months in Iran. Exchange rates have been stabilized. More investment has occurred by the private sector now, and hopes are very high. At the same time, Dr. Rouhani initiated through Dr. Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, the process of negotiations to resolve the outstanding nuclear issue, and so we could get rid of the illegal sanctions which had imposed many pressures upon the Iranian nation, including environmental damages, environmental pressures, because specifically the petroleum industry in Iran had serious setbacks in acquiring technologies which could enhance our environmental standards in the petroleum sector. And for this reason, we have had major incidences of air pollution in our large cities. So sanctions have been adversely affecting our environment, adversely affecting our health. And for this reason and many other reasons, these sanctions, the Iranian people, the Iranian government believe that they have to be lifted as quickly as possible. And the positive trend which has occurred during these negotiations has created a wave of optimism and hope for both Iranians and the international community. And it seems that we're moving on a positive direction in that regard. In addition, at the social level, the president and his government has moved for more openness, the inclusion of a wider spectrum of viewpoints in different areas related to, for example, the arts, the cinema, for publishers to be able to publish a wider spectrum of works in terms of the different viewpoints that are being expressed, for the press to be able to speak out more freely. President Rouhani has repeatedly indicated that he welcomes criticism against his government. Actually, some members of the press were taken to court by the previous government, and Dr. Rouhani ordered all those processes to be suspended, and that the government take a totally different approach vis-a-vis the press, and to uphold the freedom of expression and the freedom of press. On the issue of the environment, the president and his government has been very supportive of a serious environmental agenda in Iran, and this is also a change in terms of the policies that the former government pursued. And currently, in addition to the reviving of the Supreme Council of the Environment, which is a very important body for the environment in Iran, the president has followed many important issues like the revival of Lake Urumiyeh and air pollution, One of the major environmental challenges that we have in Iran is air pollution, and the government has now currently taken very serious steps to change that trend, introducing standard fuel with, for example, gasoline with Euro 4 standards has been one of those steps. So there are many signs, there are many signals that indicate that the government is moving in the path of moderation. Although there are many obstacles, there are still many hurdles. Improvement of relations with our neighbors is one of our top priorities. In addition to the president, members of his cabinet have been visiting neighboring countries in the region to promote relations in different areas. For example, as I mentioned, I have visited Iraq for the promotion of bilateral relations as well as relations in the field of the environment. The president himself has visited Afghanistan, Oman, and again, peace and security and improvement of relations with our neighbors is of top priority. But in addition to all of this, Dr. Rouhani proposed an initiative to the United Nations General Assembly, which was very quickly adopted there. It was taken very seriously by the General Assembly, and that was a world against violence and extremism. And this initiative somehow parallels the initiative of President Khatami in the year 2001. As you may remember, the dialogue among civilizations, and it stresses that moderation is the path to resolving many of the outstanding issues in terms of extremism and radicalism that we have. Understanding the root causes of extremism, many of which go back to conflicts, to aggression, to occupation. When societies seriously feel that their rights are undermined, they sometimes resort to extremism. It fuels violence. This is a vicious cycle which is happening in many societies, and it needs to be addressed and properly attended to. And dialogue is probably the basic instrument that we have today in bringing about more understanding among diverse societies and diverse viewpoints in today's world. And dialogue, not only to understand each other better, but to develop common strategies on important issues like ways to prevent extremism, violence, and terrorism in today's world. And this, I think, is a major strategy that we should all pursue, particularly in organizations like the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And I would like to express my gratitude for the efforts that your foundation has had in this direction to promote dialogue and understanding, and hope that this trend will continue, and it will include issues that we're dealing with in particularly our part of the world, and to find solutions which would be applicable and which would be taken up by international organizations, and where we could find ways through NGOs, through civil society, to promote a culture of peace and of dialogue, as opposed to the current trends that are unfortunately plaguing our world and undermining peace and therefore undermining human development, human advancement, and the realization of the aspirations and hopes that humanity has for a better future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, I'd like to thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for this opportunity to express views on important international issues and about the trend of events in Iran. As you mentioned, we have been witnessing deplorable conditions in Syria. And the issue is very complex now. Unfortunately, foreign interference, the presence of many foreign fighters from other countries within Syria, and the interference of other powers within the affairs of the Syrian people. And the internal challenges which the Syrian government initially did not respond properly to. It has created a very complex situation. And I think that the government of Iran, particularly now during Dr. Rouhani, has done its best to resolve the issue based on the total exit of the terrorist groups from Syria, and based on the will and the direction taken by the people of Syria themselves. I think that Iran will continue on this line to try to help to resolve, with the help of the neighbors, because the challenges are affecting neighboring countries as well. Now, Iraq is facing troubling situation due to these terrorist groups. So it's a very challenging and complex situation, and I think that the government of Iran has done its best and will continue to do so. And what is important now is the direction taken by the international community, the directions taken by other players in the region, and also neighboring countries to Syria. I think that if all of these major players, they take a correct direction and strategy with regards to resolving the issue, particularly with regards to the terrorist groups that are unfortunately finding refuge in Syria now, that would be a proper approach, and that could ultimately help to resolve the issue and relieve the Syrian people from the current conditions that they have. So Iran is ready to play its role, and Iran has always played a responsible role in this regard, particularly now during Dr. Rouhani. The government has a proactive diplomacy role, not only with relations to the region and its neighbors, but also at the larger global level. So the role of Iran is there. What we are concerned about is the role of the international community, whether international bodies play their role properly, and whether other players who are involved, whether they take the proper direction. That is, I think, the most important question that we face today. On the second issue that you mentioned, on the issue of cinema, freedom of expression in Iran, Again, Dr. Rouhani has made it very clear. His culture minister, Mr. Jannati, has made it very clear that the policy of this government is to create more openness in the sphere of arts, for the press, for authors, for those who wish to express their views or their artistic creations. And we have witnessed changes. Although all the authority in this regard is not in the hands of the government, many of the policies are taken by other authorities, as, for example, you take the judiciary. The judiciary is independent from the government, and they have their particular policies and their direction. So the government does not have the final say on all these affairs. It's an interplay between the judiciary, other authorities, and cultural players in this field, and the policies of the government. But the policies of the government are to improve conditions, and this is the general expectation of the society, and I think that we're moving in that direction. But there is a certain, I think, issue that we need to take into consideration when we're dealing with cultural issues. We believe that the society should be free to express its views and opinions. But that freedom in every society, when you talk about freedom, freedom has certain norms. Without those certain norms, it would be anarchy. For example, you take the issue of, for example, the internet. The internet is free, but when it comes to abuses done within the internet, there's a liability question, but also there's a cultural question. Are we allowed to expose our young people to the content on the internet which is not useful for them, which is detrimental to their future, to their behavior, to their thoughts? So we have limits. We have limits on the internet. We have limits on movies. We believe that some content like pornography is not suitable for young people. In the same way, we have certain norms because we believe that cultural values, human values should protect the dignity of the human being. So messages or content which are degrading the human value, the human dignity, we don't consider that to be culture. So there's a definition. More important, living in the developing world, living in the Islamic world, people sometimes tend to feel that there's a cultural aggression coming from the side of the industrialized world, or the issue of the clash of civilizations between the West and the East. They sometimes feel that there is a aggression of the Western culture on the Eastern culture. It's done through the sales of different commodities. Coca-Cola wishes to promote its products, and along with it goes a certain culture of consumerism. Soft drinks are not healthy for young people. We don't like young people to drink soft drinks all the time. But that's the business, the corporate sector. They promote their lifestyle. We have to be careful. And it's not only a religious issue. Part of it is religious, because we believe that these values are very intrinsic to human beings. And if we lose our national identity as Iranians and only accept whatever comes to us from the West, we won't have anything to deal with tomorrow. The same you here in Japan, if you lose your national identity to whatever is coming through the media, through Hollywood, through the major, right now, channels of cultural exchange, then you might lose your national identity as well. That's, I think, an important issue. That needs a proper approach. It needs to strike a balance between freedom and values, between the opportunity to express your views, to criticize, to be creative, and the values that actually uphold human dignity. And this is an important issue. This is because in many societies where apparently they claim to uphold basic freedoms, in practice you see that people are not so free to speak in political terms. Sometimes double standards you see in cultural issues. They're free to speak about consumerist policies, but when it comes to politics, they're not so free. When it comes to culture, culture is usually channelized. A certain aspect of culture, of lifestyle, is promoted. We practically don't have any society where everything is absolutely and ultimately free. We have values. And I think that that should also be understood about Iran. Iran is a country which has stood up in the revolution of 1979 for its independence, for its national identity. It has stood up against foreign domination, foreign interference, against tyranny, against dictatorship. And it seeks to preserve that identity. It seeks to preserve that independence. But at the same time, we need to preserve our basic values of democracy, because this is an Islamic republic. It is a republic based on democratic values, but at the same time adhering to the Islamic culture, to Islamic values. It's a challenge, because in itself, it's a new concept of the nation state. It's not secular, it's religious, but at the same time, it has vowed to uphold the basic values of democracy. And that is actually an internal challenge that we're facing in Iran, in the Islamic Republic of Iran, during all these years. And some of the internal conflicts that we have in Iran goes back to how we interpret the basic foundations of democracy and of religious values. How we interpret freedom, where the line of demarcation is, where can we say that this particular value needs to be upheld, and where can we open the society for expression of views, for artistic creations, for those values which help to enrich our society and our culture. So this is a challenge that we also have, and we hope to be able to widen our views and to embrace that diversity in our society. Thank you. Yes, we also have strategies for both protection of the marine environment in the Persian Gulf, as well as coastal zone management policies. We also have in the Department of the Environment, we have a deputy for the marine environment, and we welcome both regional and international cooperation to improve the quality of the marine environment in the Persian Gulf. Currently, we have very good relationships with the Regional Organization for the Protection of the Marine Environment, ROPME, which is consisting of all the regional countries, littoral countries of the Persian Gulf are members of that organization. It works under the Kuwait Convention for the protection of the marine sea area, that ROPME sea area. And we also would welcome collaboration with Japan on that issue. You know, the Persian Gulf has witnessed, unfortunately, several wars and several incidences of oil spill. And that has contributed to the deterioration of the marine environment in that region, unfortunately. And we have many damages incurred upon this the biodiversity and the fisheries have been seriously damaged due to oil spills in the past decades. So we hope to be able to recover those damages, and we welcome cooperation with Japan in this regard. Unfortunately, a long history of conflict and wars in our region, and the ongoing issue of the occupation of Palestine, it has created very unsettled and volatile conditions in Western Asia. I sincerely believe in a world without nuclear weapons, not only Middle East, but a world without nuclear weapons. And our government, and specifically Dr. Rouhani, has also moved on that theme, that we should move ahead for a world without nuclear weapons, also Middle East. I think that that is a clear-cut agenda of our government and our president. Unfortunately, militarism, as I mentioned in the first part of my talk, it overshadows political processes in most parts of the world. We have large military apparatuses in the world, military industries. Unfortunately, they sometimes need to create new conflicts for the sales of their weapons. That is a reality. And as long as our international bodies and our politicians submit to these trends, we will continue to see conflict and internal strife and violence and terrorism and wars. And I think that this requires a serious revisiting, a serious change in the directions that we're taking in international policy, in the way that we manage the affairs in today's world. There was a report on trafficking. I think the report was published in 2007 on trafficking, and the report said it was done by a United Nations body. And the report said that there are three major types of trafficking in today's world, and they have the final say in many areas: human trafficking, drugs trafficking, and arms trafficking. And the result of that report was that the turnover the financial turnover of these three types of trafficking and the political power that they wield is much stronger than the official governments that rule today's world. This is a reality, and it's the same for nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are no exception. And that requires a major shift in our mentality, in our approach on how we're dealing with global issues, how we are running the affairs of today's world. And on improvement of relations with countries in our region, our neighbors, and particularly countries of the Persian Gulf, this is one of the initial strategies that Dr. Rouhani mentioned in his proactive foreign diplomacy agenda, was to improve relations with our neighbors. And he has been very active in that regard. As I mentioned, he had a bilateral visit to Oman a few weeks ago, which was very successful. And also he has been in contact with other leaders from the Arab world on different issues. And I think that there are many hopes to mend and improve relations and to come together on our common interests for peace and stability, particularly the initiative that Dr. Rouhani started on the WAVE initiative, the World Against Violence and Extremism. That's a very important initiative, and much of it goes back to the Arab world and to our neighboring countries. And we have to work to that direction. We have to work at the level of the people, the civil societies, the NGOs. I personally started up a NGO initiative before I was appointed as the vice president, Muslim Mothers for Peace. And we started an initiative with the daughter of Hura Sadr, the daughter of Imam Musa Sadr from Lebanon, as well as women from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Egypt. We started an NGO initiative, and it was very well received by women in that region to stand up and speak against violence and extremism and against the very, very wrong interpretations that are being made about Islam. And I think that such initiatives should be supported and strengthened, and we have to continue both at the level of general diplomacy as well as the level of governments and official diplomacy to mend ties and enhance relations in our region. Thank you. Thank you. Well, usually I think societies, if they keep their dynamic quality, human beings have a intrinsic dynamic quality for improvement, for betterment, for change, and that's a God-given quality. We all try to continuously improve ourselves, our societies, for betterment of our conditions. In cases where that reform and betterment is not successful, reform develops into a revolution, like you mentioned. And that happened in 1979 in our country. It happened in the Arab Spring or Islamic Awakening in our region, in some countries. So that gradual process of betterment is very important, even after the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Again, we have a dynamic society, and we require a continual process of reform and betterment in Iran. And I think that what happened during this recent elections was a clear indication of this expectation on behalf of the Iranian people to improve and to reform their social conditions, their economic conditions, their relationships with the world. And, well, we have a wide spectrum of different political tendencies in Iran. We have more conservative groups, we have more radical groups, we have more reformist political groups in Iran. And what's important is to preserve this diversity, to respect the diversity of opinions that we do have in Iran. And I think that this is the policy of the government. And Dr. Rouhani has emphasized on his policy to respect both ethnic groups, religious dominations, religious minorities in Iran, and he has taken serious steps in that regard. And for that reason, I think that the policy of moderation will succeed if it continues to see all the diverse elements of our society. And it will be able to meet the expectations of the people and particularly the younger generation. The reason why I'm optimistic or maybe realistic on the nuclear issue is that we have, I'm sure that we have good intentions on our side to resolve the issue in a logical and rational method. And we have capable diplomats. We have a foreign minister who is highly experienced. And I think that our position on this issue, the position of our president, who is also well versed and well experienced on this issue, is a legal position, and it is in the line and the context of international regulations, international law. So in that perspective, I think that if we move in that direction with that rational approach, respecting the rights of the Iranian nation, I am optimistic that we will face a resolution to the issue. I hope that that goodwill and that legal approach also exists on the other side, because this is a two-sided issue. I hope that ultimately there is a win-win solution, and that both sides feel that they have achieved within their rights, they have achieved a position where there is confidence to proceed forward and to look to the future for resolving other issues and going ahead and working together on trade and business and working together for the betterment of our global environment. On relations with the U.S., I think that initial steps have been taken in that regard, and once the nuclear issue is resolved, I hope that some of the mistrust that exists between the two governments, I hope that that could be resolved mostly by initiatives taken by the American government to mend some of what has happened in the past. In that instance, I think that relations will be possible, although these relations may not be very cordial, but maintaining diplomatic relations happens even when countries are in war. We're not in war with the United States, and I think that we can look forward to the future. But the important point is that the United States should also see its relations with Iran at an equal level. That's very important. Some countries in today's world still take the position of the big brother or the superpower, and I think that that type of relationship does not work out with Iran. And if that approach changes in dealing with Iran, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to work, Iran and the United States, to work together for peace, for stability, for working together against extremism, against terrorism, against drug trafficking, against many of the adverse issues which are plaguing our world today, to cooperate in the field of the environment. I think that these are all areas where our two countries could work together in the future. Well, the women have had a very important role in the election of Dr. Rouhani, as they had an important role in the election of Dr. Khatami in 1997. They were very instrumental in the reform process at that time, and now they have been very instrumental in the election of Dr. Rouhani and in the moderation process. It's very important because we have a emerging elite of educated women now in Iran. For several years now, women have over about 60% of those gaining entrance to the nationwide university entrance exams without any quota have been Iranian women, Iranian girls. So that means that we have a surge of educated women, and in addition to the fact that they're looking for jobs and employment, and that's a challenge, but they're also looking forward to a society where they will have a role to play, and they will be regarded as citizens, first-class citizens. And I think that that is a major expectation, and we hope that they will be able to play that role. We hope that we could find opportunities for employment for our young generation, particularly the educated men and women of this generation. And we hope that we could open up to hear their voices, to address their concerns, to be able to respond to the questions that they have. I have had many sessions in universities dealing with students who, as you mentioned, did not see the revolution in 1979. And they ask many questions about what happened and why it happened and why some of the actions that we took at that time, and the aftermath. And I think that that's an important process, because the revolution in 1979 goes back to our, as I mentioned, goes back to our basic values, basic human values, basic identity as Iranians today. So we would like to see a society where these young people can speak out and present their concerns, and so we would be able to address those issues properly. Thank you. As you mentioned, we have a national agenda to diversify our energy resources. Although we are a oil producing, gas producing and exporting country with rich fossil fuel resources, but we also look forward to diversify our energy resources, and nuclear energy is one of the areas where we still intend to invest upon, and we will proceed in terms of nuclear technologies, both in the field of energy, but also medical technologies and other areas related to betterment of the lives of our citizens. So, I think that Japan could play a proactive role in that regard to both mend and improve ties with the international community, and also help to resolve the issue, as I mentioned, with a balanced and rational approach. We hope to be able to collaborate on all different areas with Japan, including the area of nuclear technologies, as we hope to collaborate with Japan on areas like solar energy, wind energy. Iran has plenty of sun, so we hope that solar energy is also an area. Also, we have plenty of wind, and I think that these are all areas where we can work together, and that is an area which could help to promote peace. These are peaceful technologies, and I think it's the right of any nation to have access and to develop these peaceful technologies.